Okay, now that we've exported our high, low, and mid poly, I'm sort of copying a shortcut to my directory and importing the low into Maya and checking it. Looks good. Okay, just rotate around, make sure it looks alright, import it okay. And one of the next things you want to do is go to Mesh Display and Soften Edge. This basically removes the faceting that comes from normally exporting a decimated mesh from ZBrush. Here I've imported the mid poly from ZBrush. This one you don't need to smooth because it's high enough poly, it's going to be okay. Plus it's only there for reference. Now I'm just going to sort of apply a generic material so that I can kind of see the mid poly a little bit better. I think I put like a bright red or like a green or something so you can see where it's penetrating the mesh. The reason why you have the mid poly is so that you can make your shell completely encase it, or as good as possible. See there, you can see they're kind of on top of each other. So what you want to do is go to Edit Mesh and go to Transform, and what this will do is allow you to basically inflate based on the, I guess, local space of the vertex. So see there, I'm pulling out on the blue arrow, directional arrow, and it just sort of inflated it just a tiny bit so that it encompasses the vertices to try and get this to fill out the space. You kind of have to nudge them around a little bit so they all fit. It can be pretty far off. It's not always great to be, but you can get away with quite a bit. But if it's penetrating, usually you'll have artifacts where all of a sudden you'll have like this little piece cutting through, causing this massive error in your normal map. Sometimes, depending on how noisy it is and how many textures there are, you can get away with that, but we're trying to keep these as clean as possible. It's just a good habit to get into. You can get really meticulous about this, but it doesn't have to be super grueling. You can kind of do it a quick pass. I could have retopologized this whole thing with quad. Be going over that at some point during this course, but for this object, it's basically a abstract rectilinear blob shape. So for something like that, you can get away with just doing a decimated mesh, bringing it in, and I'm zooming in and out to check to see how the mid poly works based on the cage, nudging a few verts around, and I decided to spin this edge. See right there, it's a little bit weird. If you hold Control Alt left and then hit left or right arrow, you can spin it in a direction. See, that one's kind of funky, so hold Control Alt and either hit left or right. It's a super powerful tool. People used to have to do this a lot back in the old days of modeling when you had only a few polygons or tries to create a whole character or environment. You used to have to be really creative with the way you spun the edge. Be sure to delete all by type history under edit, delete all by type and history. It's a good habit to get into, and save your scene. Week 2 rock baker file. So this is just a file and it's facing the wrong direction, so I need to go ahead and spin that UV unwrapper so that it kind of goes along the lengthwise. We could do it this way, but the shape's more of a rectangle or cylinder the opposite way. So I'm just sort of checking it and rotating it here. You can do that by clicking on the little ring, and that'll give you different controls. See here, it's really messy, but that's okay because I can just sort of go through and click on the sort of relax tools, rotate it around a bit. It's kind of crazy looking right now, but the tools in Maya make it really easy to unwrap stuff like this. And the power of baking from a high poly to a low poly, it'll basically be seamless. You won't really be able to notice. Sometimes it kind of curls up like this. You need to go through and double click to then just sort of apply the relax manually. It can do some weird stuff. I usually use Legacy. Unfold 3D works well too. It's just a habit. So I sort of like, a good way to get it to balance out a little bit is to select the top and then sort of relax it and then apply it to the bottom and the sides. It forces it to kind of come up with it forces it to balance out the UVs a little bit more. See there, it's okay. It's not perfect, but it'll work. The main thing is you won't really notice it too much on the high poly, but when we have a scale, a tiling normal map on the inside that's smaller, you'll see a lot more stretching. So we just want to sort of check and make sure that those little squares are kind of the same size, or at least roughly. There might be a little bit of stretching, but that's okay. It's going to be high enough detail that you won't really notice. Just keep working it until nothing's overlapping and everything feels pretty well laid out. It takes a bit of finesse kind of learning how to do this. Those will feel a little bit tight, so I sort of nudge them out here and there and then just sort of check it. Those look a little bit close to, I think those are actually from Decimation Master. It does a really good job of merging stuff, but those are kind of wasteful, so I'm just going to go ahead and merge that. See, we don't need those. That's the one good thing to check when you're doing Decimation Master. That caused a little bit of penetration, so now we're going to need to move that out so that it's outside. It fully encompasses the mid poly. Now a little reminder while we're using the mid poly instead of the high poly is that it's just lower resolution, but it maintains so much of the detail that you can get very specific about how you make the cage, and you'll know that it'll, you know, most likely encompass all of the high poly, because all the major shapes and even most of the minor shapes and mid-size shapes are all there. Okay, so now that I merge that, I'm still kind of not happy with the way this is set up, so I'm going to sort of check it, rotate it around, see what's going on. And as you can see, that edge is still kind of weird, so I'm just going to go and I'm going to select the edge, hold Control Alt and hit left or right and spin the edge. See, that gives us a much better shape there. So I'm pretty happy with this shell overall. There are definitely some seams on the edge. This is kind of strange, so I'm going to sort of nudge this around. I don't like the way that's laid out, so I'm just going to kind of merge these two. Looks like they're close enough. Go to polygons and then merge and nudge these out. A little bit of warping's okay. So pretty happy with those UVs. Go back to object mode and once again delete history, and then file, export selection, and find the directory that you'd like to export it to. I'm going to put in the same one that I exported the low poly, mid, and high poly in. And I'm looking for the OBJ exporter, but I forget that Maya doesn't have it set up by default, so I need to go enable that. In case you run into the same problem, it's under Windows, Settings and Preference, and Plugin Manager. And just scroll down. On the left, you'll see the names of different plugins. OBJ Export is the one you want. Turn on Loaded and Auto Load. Refresh and close, and now export selection again, and go to your directory and look for the OBJ export. It's right at the bottom there. Okay, that all looks fine. You can leave most of that as is, and I'm going to export into my ZBrush export directory and name it low-uv, so that way I know which one it is in XNormal.